Welcome to the Brute Facts Podcast with your host and everybody's favorite Christian, Eddie Kroom. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell for future content.
Welcome to Brute Facts Podcast. Man, I love that intro. Pasta Mike is, he's a beast, man. I love it. Thank you so much, Pasta. Appreciate that. So I got a good guest tonight, as usual. This happens to be a friend of mine who was an inspiration for me, actually. And his name is Clinton Wilcox, and he is into what's called bioethics. Which includes not just pro-life and pro-choice arguments, but even the end of life. And he is with Life Training Institute, which is a fantastic organization, has a lot of material for people on the pro-life side that's looking for good arguments, good resources. I believe Scott Klusendorf is one of the main guys over there, and he, in my opinion, is pretty brilliant. Like a lot of his work, for sure. And I met Clinton on Facebook years ago, and we've kind of talked over the years, and I was always really into, pro-life. I've always been a staunch pro-life person, and really didn't know where to go to get the academic stuff. And so I've kind of leaned on him a bit over the years with recommendations and actually some of his writings. He publishes things at different sites around the internet. He has a lot of his own work that he does. He teaches logic. He is a pretty smart cat. He's a Christian too. So that's 2 points for our team. But anyway, I am going to bring him on. He is sitting back there wondering what's taking so long and why I keep talking. So he's the star of the show. It's time to let him go. How you doing, Clinton?
Hey, Eddie, I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get, you're a Christian. Have you been a Christian your whole life, pretty much, right?
Yeah. And, before we go, I just want to kind of apologize for my setup here. I recently moved out of state. And so I'm still getting my setup positioned. So right now it looks like I'm not looking at the camera, but I'm actually looking right at my laptop to see you. And the webcam I have set up is right there. So if I look at it, I can only see you right out of the corner of my eye, which is a little awkward to talk to. So I apologize if it looks like I'm not looking at you. I actually am looking right at my laptop.
Okay. That's unacceptable. No,
I'm sorry.
No, it's fantastic. Hey, trust me, we've had worse.
Yeah, just take it out of my stipend at the end. That's fine.
There you go.
I've been a Christian all my life. Basically came out of the womb holding a Bible. Actually, when I was 4 years old, I attended Vacation Bible School at my little Baptist church in Madera, California, and I accepted Christ while I was there. And of course, 4 years old is kind of young, but I stuck with it my entire life. So whether you think my conversion experience happened right there when I accepted Christ at 4 years old, or if it was a more more of a process and happened later on. Either way, I've basically been in the church my entire life since I was at least 4 years old. So
okay, sweet. Yeah, there's a lot of people get saved at a lot of different ages, and it's weird because I know lots of people who were saved at a really young age that people would be, how did you do that? How does that work? But there's such a maturing process there that even if you weren't or whatever, at some point you were come along the way. So how did you get into pro-life and wanting, so I mean, I understand why somebody wanted defend it, but so ardently with the academic work.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of a long story. I was actually going to college for a music education degree, and I kind of got sidetracked into pro-life work. After I'd gotten out of high school, I went to college, and I took a public speaking class. And in that public speaking class, one of my speeches had to be on a controversial topic, and the topic I chose was just kind of out of thin air. But I chose the topic of abortion, and you had to present the position in such a way that the people listening couldn't tell which side of the aisle you came down on. So you actually had to present the arguments for and against in a way that was balanced, so that your own position didn't come through. So as I studied the topic of abortion, I started to actually realize what abortion was. Like I said, I've been a Christian all my life, so I would have been pro-life, but it was never something that ever impacted me. Never got anyone pregnant in high school. I never really knew anyone who told me that they'd ever had an abortion or anything like that. Never knew anyone going through that kind of situation. So it was just something I'd never really thought about. But when I actually started studying the topic for this speech and started looking at the arguments for and against, I came to realize that the weight of the arguments, it's not even close. The weight of the arguments come down on the pro-life side, especially when you start looking at the science of embryology and you start looking at, just the whole developmental process. And, as far as I'm concerned, it's just, there's an avalanche of evidence on the pro-life side compared to the pro-choice side. And so my older sister knew that I was interested in doing more on the abortion issue, like getting involved in it. And so one of our local pro-life apologists, whose name was Josh Brom, who may be familiar to some of your audience if they do much reading or studying in the pro-life issue.
I believe I've heard the name before. I'm not
really
though.
He's the director of Equal Rights Institute right now, but he used to work. Yeah, he used to work for Right to Life in Central California, which is our local Right to Life organization. And he was heading up the local 40 Days for Life. So my sister took me down to meet him and introduced me to him. And nothing happened for about a year or so, but then we actually became friends, and he actually started mentoring me in the pro-life movement. And so he took me through a program they were doing called Justice for All, which was led at the time by David Lee, but Stephen Wagner is the director of it now after David Lee left. And so I went through the program a few times, and then indicated that I was interested in becoming a mentor through the organization, and then eventually I became a speaker through them as well. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. I started publishing articles on various pro-life blogs like Secular Pro-Life. I got some articles picked up at National Pro-Life Committee, Life News, Life Site News, other sites like that. And through the articles that I published, I got the attention of Scott Klusendorf, who, as you mentioned, is the director of Life Training Institute, one of the best pro-life educational organizations. And Scott himself is probably the leading American speaker on the pro-life issue. He's the go-to guy if you want the best of the best, essentially. And I got to my church. Oh, it's okay. So I got to my church one day because I led the contemporary worship band there. Got to my church and fired up the computer so I could check my messages on Facebook, and got a message from Scott out of the blue, and he said, "Hey, do you work for any pro-life organizations?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Would you like to come work for LTI?" And that's how I got involved there.
Rock on. Yeah, that's got in there with the heavyweights on that one. That's so I actually had read quite a few of your articles on secular pro-life and didn't even realize it was you. And then I realized later I'd run across a real old article, and it just happened to have your name just right there at the bottom of it. And I was like, "Whoa, hey, that's Clinton," So, and what I like about it is, and this is, a lot of people think that to be a theist and be pro-life, that your arguments are based on God. And that's just not true at all. I mean, of course, we can go back and talk about, the value of human life and human beings and things of that nature on a theistic worldview. But the arguments themselves, and like you said, I'm with you all the way. I'm sure there's a lot of pro-choice people who disagree, but I don't see really, in my opinion, and I don't mean to be flippant about it, but I don't see any that are compelling to me at all. I think there's an enormous amount on the pro-life side. So what would you say would be your favorite pro-life, and then the most powerful pro-choice.
Yeah. In fact, I would tell people that you can certainly make a religious argument against abortion. I'm at home, talking about God and the Bible if I'm talking to a Christian believer. But most of the people I talk to are not Christians. And so they don't hold the Bible up as an authority. So I prefer to use arguments that come from authorities that non-religious people respect, science and philosophy. And that way, even if I'm talking to a Christian, I'll have other arguments that I can present to them too, things that I don't necessarily need to rely on the Bible, because even pro-choice Christians will say, well, you can't just make make legal policy based on Scripture, So even then, science and philosophy usually come in really handy as well. So when it comes to my favorite pro-life argument, and there are a lot that are good arguments that I think justify the pro-life position, but my favorite argument would be the argument for my identity. And this is an argument that you may be familiar with the name Alex Proust.
Oh yes, a lot of his stuff in philosophy.
Okay, cool. Yeah, 'cause he's a brilliant Christian philosopher, but he actually has written some things on the pro-life position, and he constructed an argument called the argument from identity. Another pro-life philosopher named Stephen Napier I've seen has formulated a similar argument too, and I think he calls it something different, but I prefer just argument from identity because that just kind of tells you what it is, and really just kind of explains it in the name what kind of an argument it is. And the argument essentially goes like this: that I'm alive today. That's uncontroversial. And so the question is, did I come from the fetus that was in my mother's womb, the one that was conceived and eventually grew up into me? Am I identical to the fetus that was in that womb, or am I not identical to that fetus? Well, it seems like there are only three possibilities. Either I am not identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb. Number two, I am identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb, but the fetus died at some point. Or number three, that I am identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb, and that fetus is still alive. Well, it doesn't seem plausible that I am not identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb, because if that's the case, then when I came into existence at some point, like when that fetus was suddenly able to engage in higher rational thought, be conscious and self-aware, things like that. Well, it seems like there would be two physical entities occupying the same spot, because I'm a biological being, and that fetus is a biological being. So if I'm not identical to the fetus, then there are two individuals occupying the same position in space. But that, of course, violates a rule of physics, that two physical things cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So that seems like that position won't work. That just because it leads to a contradiction. It violates a law of physics, an established law of physics. So it's not the case that I'm not identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb. But what about the position that I am identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb, but the fetus died at some point? Well, that also doesn't seem plausible, because in that case, the fetus would have died by undergoing processes that were within its underlying programming to undergo. It died once it reached the state in which it was able to become conscious or self-aware, at which point I took over. But the thing is that things, especially organisms, don't die by undergoing processes that are within their internal programming to undergo. So it's just not plausible that I could be identical with the fetus that's in my mother's womb, but the fetus died at some point. And so the third possibility is I am identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb, but the fetus is still alive. And that seems like the only plausible alternative, is that I am identical to that fetus that was in my mother's womb. So that's just kind of a short way of explaining it. There's a lot deeper you can go into, but I was trying to keep it short and simple for the podcast here. So yeah, so the only plausible explanation is that I am identical to the fetus that was in my mother's womb, and the fetus is still alive. The fetus grew up into me. So and that I think is.
Actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say
no,
that's
ahead.
actually kind of a simplified version, I'll ask people sometimes, I'll be, when did you start becoming you? At what point were you you? Or was there ever a point that you weren't you? Because to me, I think that kind of really draws out, how identity seems to be, this fluent part of us that just, over time, I don't understand how, you can be this, you can be A at this point, but not A at some point prior to that. It just doesn't make sense to me. So and that was Alexander Pruse's, right?
Yeah. He wrote an article called "I Was Once a Fetus: an identity-based argument against abortion." And like I said, it goes a lot deeper and a lot more complex than that. So this is really an argument that's meant to convince, like academic philosophers, that kind of thing. But I also think it's the best argument to show that the pro-life position is true. There are other arguments that I might use when I'm talking to a pro-choice person who doesn't have any sort of philosophical training, because there are certainly simpler arguments that are easier to understand, which I think also do the job of refuting the pro-choice position and defending the pro-life position. But I think the argument for identity is probably one of the best that there are for the pro-life position.
One of the ones I like to use a lot is, a lot of people for some reason want to separate personhood from, a human organism. And I don't even grant that. I reject that outright, because I don't think that you can separate personhood from a human being. So one of the issues that I think, in my opinion, that is huge about it is, the arbitrariness of trying to find, because if you boil it all down, conception is it's the least arbitrary position for when human beings begin. And it's almost like the only demarcation that you can get would be, even though it's not like an immediate thing, it's still, far more of a demarcation, because any pro-choice people that you ask, when a person that use the personhood is when a person begins to be a person, almost all of them have a different answer. And then they base it on accidental properties, like there has to be at least the brain forming or things like this because of consciousness. And it just causes so many issues, like the episodic problem and all these other issues, where you have all these ad hoc rationalizations that you have to add now. So like when someone goes in a coma, or when you go to sleep, or, things of that nature. So I have interacted with the identity argument, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time on it. So I'm glad you reminded me about Proust, because I've read quite a few of his pro-life stuff, and he's fantastic.
He is. And so you also asked me which I think is the most powerful pro-choice argument. And, there are a wide range of pro-choice arguments, and, some are obviously better than others. There are a lot of arguments that are just, fallacious, and a lot of them that just don't. Especially, they basically ignore the question of whether or not the fetus is a person, because if the fetus is a person, most pro-choice arguments don't work. Like even bodily rights arguments fail if the fetus is a person. So, for example, Judith Jarvis Thompson's violinist argument is usually that's usually the go-to argument for most lay pro-choice people, because anyone who's just taken a first-year philosophy class has come across the violinist argument by Judith Jarvis Thompson. So that's the one academic argument street-level pro-choice people are going to have heard at the very least. But the thing is that we have a right to bodily autonomy and integrity, but not at the expense of other people's lives. So if the fetus is a person, then bodily rights does not justify abortion. And now Judith Jarvis Thompson was trying to argue that abortion is justified if the fetus is a person, but she failed miserably in justifying that. And even pro-choice thinkers like Michael Tooley and Kate Greasley have essentially stated, bodily rights doesn't justify abortion if the fetus is a person, because like they often say, my right to end where your nose begins. My right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. And so, you can exercise your rights, but not at the expense of other people. So, I think,
that note, I'm sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mean to cut you off, but I wanted to make a quick point about here, or get your opinion on it. So on that note, I've heard it said, by pro-choicers who take the personhood argument, that if it is a person at any point and we deem it a person, then you can't kill the fetus because the Constitution specifically protects persons. So I'd heard that from several of them, and it sounded, I guess, okay if it, of course, as well as I do that it never defines what a person is, but if it protects persons.
No, it never defines what a person is, but it doesn't have to, because it assumes what a person is.
Right.
I mean, it's a little bit of a there's a lot you could say about the constitutionality of it, but Roe v. Wade was an unconstitutional decision because the Constitution quite clearly rejects abortion out of hand. The founders never thought abortion was something that should be legal. Past the point of quickening, because back then science discovered in the mid 1800s that life begins at fertilization. But back when the United States was first around, they believed it was quickening, because that was the point at which the woman could feel the child moving. So that's when she could know for a fact that it was alive.
It was terrible
So
around. I'm sorry. I
yeah,
said it was terrible all the way around.
Well, it was. I mean, it was based in bad philosophy. It was based in bad jurisprudence. It was based in a terrible understanding of the Constitution. But that's a whole episode we could do right there too.
Yeah.
But one of the most common arguments is that the 14th Amendment. Yeah, one of the most common arguments is that the 14th Amendment justifies abortion because it says you have to be born or naturalized to be a person, but that's not what it says at all. If you actually read the 14th Amendment for yourself, the language is quite clear that any person born or naturalized in the United States is a U.S. citizen. So being born or naturalized is about being a citizen, not about being a person. In fact, it assumes that being born is something that happens to a person. It implicitly assumes personhood of the unborn. So the 14th Amendment, which was actually ratified. Are you still there, Eddie?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. I was bringing the screen up.
Okay, no problem. I lost you for a moment. I want to make sure I didn't get disconnected. Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure I didn't get disconnected because I lost your video feed there. But yeah, so the 14th Amendment, which was ratified to grant rights to Black people, it's absurd to think that the Supreme Court would actually use that same amendment to then deny rights to the unborn. So Roe v. Wade was just an absurd, unconstitutional decision all the way around. And even pro-choice thinkers, back when Roe v. Wade was decided on, were critical of the decision because it was such a badly ruled case. So but again, there's a lot to say on that. But Roe v. Wade was a terribly unconstitutional decision. We should not be denying rights to human beings. That's why we had slavery. That's why the Holocaust went on. That's why the Cambodian genocide happened, because personhood was denied to actual human beings. And so, there's absolutely no reason to think that here in the 21st century, now we finally got it right when we're denying rights to human beings. It's just that's just absurd to think that now of all times we finally have it right, instead of we're just making another extreme blunder in denying rights to human individuals.
I'd like to bring up a point on that, but I'm gonna let you with your favorite. I mean, the most powerful pro-choice. But after that, I want to say a point on that too.
Okay, so I wanted to bring that thing up about bodily rights because it's emotionally powerful, but logically it doesn't work, and it especially doesn't work if the fetus is a person, contra what Thompson was trying to argue. So arguments from personhood, trying to deny personhood to the unborn, there's stronger arguments, but I don't think, because I think that there's a lot of reasons to reject those kinds of arguments, not just because I think they're wrong or wrong-headed, but also because, like I said, we have no way of knowing if we're actually right now in denying rights to a certain group of human beings. So I think it behooves us to err on the side of caution when trying to apply rights to certain individuals or take them away. So I think probably the strongest, in my opinion, the strongest pro-choice argument, I think, would be the argument from sentience. And this is an argument that Wayne Sumner makes in his book Abortion and Moral Theory, I think is what it's called. And sentience is it means that the individual is able to have feelings, and specifically the ability to feel pain. So he says that, what matters is not what species you are. It's not that you're human or that you're some other species. What matters is your capacity to suffer. And so if you can suffer, then I have an obligation not to harm you or not to mistreat you. And so because the unborn don't feel pain, early in pregnancy, and they do feel pain later in pregnancy, abortion should be completely unrestricted in the early part of pregnancy, like the first trimester and a half or so, and then during the late trimester, like the third trimester, abortion is a lot harder to justify at that point, and that's because the unborn can most likely feel pain at that point, and so. I think this is probably one, in my opinion, the strongest pro-choice argument, because number one, it's at least grounded in something that's plausible. It's plausible to think that if you can suffer, that grounds an obligation for me not to harm you. So that's at least a plausible way to ground my obligations towards someone, I think. And number two, it also accounts for the intuition that even pro-choice people have, that abortion should be unrestricted in the first trimester of pregnancy, but then gets harder to justify as you go later in pregnancy, because Gallup polls have actually shown that even among pro-choice people, the majority of Americans believe that abortion should be illegal in most cases in the third trimester. So even pro-choice people, the average pro-choice person does not believe abortion is permissible in the third trimester. So Sumner's argument from sentience, I think, also quite well explains this intuition that even pro-choice people have, that abortion gets harder to justify the later in pregnancy it gets. And so those are a couple of reasons why I believe that Wayne Sumner's sentience argument is actually one of the strongest to justify abortion.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. The one of the points I wanted to make was that it seems like the only time, or at least in the majority of cases, that we want to strip a certain group of human beings from the status of personhood or lesser persons is to, in some kind of way, oppress them or outright kill them. And it seems, so when we start defining what a person is outside of being an offspring of, human organisms, I think that the pro-life position, not only because of the arguments, but because it protects the largest number of human organisms that we have. It doesn't discriminate, against certain individuals, of the human species. So.
Yeah, and this is a point that Frank Beckwith makes in his book Defending Life too, is that the pro-life position is the inclusive position, because we believe that all human beings are valuable and deserving of rights, whereas the pro-choice position is exclusive. Only people who are relevantly like me deserve rights.
Right. Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's a valid observation too.
Yeah. So let's go ahead. So I know I've got probably a few people that are in the chat who's not, too familiar with a lot of these different back and forths on the pro-choice and pro-life. And sadly, I keep hearing today about the fire in the laboratory with, the Petri dishes or, fertilized eggs. You say,
yeah.
So go ahead and destroy that for me.
So you want me to respond to the embryo rescue case?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Yes, terrible reasoning.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It's actually, depending on how you use it, it's actually a valuable thought experiment. It's not valuable if you're trying to justify abortion, though. So essentially, the embryo rescue case, or I've called it the burning IVF facility, but that's one of the problems in philosophy, is that no one calls one thing, the same thing. So you could have you could read like 4 or 5 different names for it, and you kind of have to keep track of like what everything means. Like, okay, like the position that we were talking about, where if you don't have some property, you're not a person. I've seen that referred to as functionalism. I've heard that referred to as the anti-equality position. I've heard it referred to as a lot of different things. You have to keep them all straight. But the burning IVF facility, I've heard also called the embryo rescue case, and that essentially goes like that. You got like this: you find yourself in a fertility clinic, and a fire breaks out. Most of the people have evacuated already, but you find yourself in there, and there are 2 rooms, and you're only going to be able to access one to save whatever's inside. And so in one room there is a 2-year-old child, 2-year-old born child, and in the other room is a vial of embryos. And the number differs based on how much of a monster the pro-choice person wants to make you out to be. They might say there's 10. They might say there's 10 embryos. They might say 100. They might say 1,000. So just however many embryos are in that vial, choose whatever number you want. And they say, so if most people are, a right-thinking individual will go and save the 2-year-old born child, because that's just what people would do. If you're going to run in and save the vial of embryos, if you really believe that one life is equal to one life, then you would be obligated to run in and save the vial of embryos, the 10 embryos or 1,000 or whatever. But we know that most people, or all right-thinking individuals, would save the 2-year-old child, and so that proves that human life is not equal, because you would save the toddler over the vial of embryos. And that's sort of the dilemma that they've kind of leveled upon us. And now there are a number of responses that I can give to this, but probably the most basic one is that this thought experiment does not investigate who we can kill. This thought experiment investigates who we should save in a particular situation. So, suppose I do believe I should run in and save the vial of 10 embryos. How does it then follow that the toddler is not a valuable human being, or that I think that we should be able to kill the toddler to benefit someone else? Well, that just doesn't follow. So the embryo rescue case is really about who we should save, not about who we should kill. So while it's a valuable thought experiment to investigate, like, okay, what we think of human value, or if we would save the toddler, like, why is that? Why would we go for the toddler instead of the embryos? These are all important questions to ponder, but it certainly doesn't follow that if I go in and save the vial of embryos, that I then believe that we ought to be able to kill the toddler for any reason, or that I don't think the toddler is a valuable human person. So the thought experiment here is used poorly if you're trying to justify abortion with it. But I could also give an answer to the question. And that, number one, I think it's entirely plausible we can consider at least one person who might run in and save the vial of embryos. For example, what if the person stuck in the burning IVF clinic is a scientist who conceived these embryos? But what if he's the father of these embryos? Well, then you might think, well, yeah, I need to run in and save these embryos because I'm going to implant them, and they're going to be born, and that kind of thing. Or a pro-life person might actually run in and save the toddler. And there's a couple things we can say about that. Is that, number one, in this situation, you're probably not going to be thinking logically. You're going to be thinking emotionally. So even though you have a bigger emotional connection with the toddler and not with the embryos, that might cause you to run in and save the toddler. That doesn't mean that you're being inconsistent. It just means that under pressure, you made a decision which you probably wouldn't have made if you had the time to really reason through and think logically about it. But there are other reasons which a pro-life person might actually be justified to run in and save the toddler. And that, number one, you have no idea what's going to happen to those embryos. They might actually just be earmarked for scientific experimentation. They might be going to be destroyed for their stem cells or something. And even if they were going to be implanted inside a woman, there's no 100% guarantee that they're going to take and that they're going to survive to the time of birth. The toddler, has a 100% chance of survival. So, and not only that, if you were to save the embryos, that the toddler would die horribly in the fire because he's at a point where he's able to feel pain, and so he's going to suffer when he dies, whereas the embryos won't. So there are actually a number of reasons why a pro-life person might go in and save the toddler and consider himself justified in doing so. And then, there are a number of different ways you can adjust the thought experiment, to show who you would save in certain cases. But again, it just all boils down to, it's not a thought experiment to decide who we can kill. It's just a thought experiment to investigate who we should save and under what circumstances.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of one of the points that, I make sure I hammer home is we're making value judgments. I mean, value judgments based on the ability for survival. So just because, well, let me take that back, not value judgments. We're making judgments on which is most likely to survive. So it doesn't mean that the fertilized eggs, the embryos, it doesn't mean they don't have value, and it doesn't follow that because we can't save all of them, that, like you said, we're justified in killing them. I mean, we're literally trying to, it's like the trolley problem. I mean, there's not a good, there's not a perfect way to do it. We're going to try to save the ones we can. Same thing. You run into a building and you got a 90-year-old person you're going to have to carry, or you got a toddler, a little, or young child further away who can run. You're going to have to get the child so that the child can at least try to run out, and hopefully you got time to get the older person that you're going to have to carry. It's not that older person no longer has value.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we're not justified. I mean, it doesn't mean we're justified in killing them. We just have to make those split-second decisions, and who has the best survivability, out of the situation. So the next one would be one of the points that I bring up. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. We must have a delay.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just going to say, yeah, I think so. Like a 5-second delay or something, it sounds like. But yeah, I was just going to say that, the embryo rescue case is actually weaker than the trolley case, because in the trolley case, if you switch the track, you're directly responsible for killing the one person to save the 5. Whereas in the embryo rescue case, you're not responsible for anyone's death because except in some I don't know what the term would be, but like a very, very low proximate sense, in that you're responsible for the person's death because you didn't save them, but you're not directly responsible for that person's death like you would be in the trolley problem.
Yeah. So in other cases, or this is one, I've heard some crazy scenarios where it's almost like they try to
actually. If you don't mind, sorry to interrupt. I just thought this might actually be an interesting tidbit to your listeners. Is that the trolley problem was actually formulated by a pro-life philosopher named Philippa Foot. It was formulated by her to investigate double effect reasoning that some pro-life people used when trying to justify life-saving abortions. So, that's a little interesting tidbit that I learned a few years ago. So,
yeah, that's awesome. I had no idea. That's fantastic. So appreciate that. Yeah. So when they come up with these crazy scenarios, because they try to get an analogy as close as possible to a fetus, and just, you can't get there without talking about a fetus. And so they're like, you cause a wreck and you hurt somebody and they need a kidney and all this stuff. And I'm like, one of the major differences, I'd like to get your opinion on this take, and this is not mine, this is one I heard from someone else, was, when you have a fetus, you have forced dependency on someone, as opposed to in just about any other scenario, or any other scenario I've heard, you haven't forced dependency on you, especially against their will. Because the fetus, the person, doesn't have a say in being brought into the world or being created or any of this, and obviously can't make it, on their own. So you have forced them into this situation and forced them dependent on you. So all these other analogies seem to break down because, how do you get to a situation in an analogy where you're actually forcing dependency on someone other than like a fetus situation?
Yeah, in fact, that's what Judith Jarvis Thompson was trying to do with her violinist scenario. She wanted to make the scenario as like pregnancy as she could. And so, there's this violinist who's suffering from a kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all available donors and found that you're the only available match where they kidnap you and plug you into his kidney, and now you're there in the hospital room, filtering his blood through your kidney, and you need to remain there plugged in for 9 months in order for this violinist to heal. And so, yeah, the responsibility objection is the objection that you were essentially raising, is that, and this is I view this as a defeater of these violinist type arguments, but it's not as strong as it could be, because obviously they don't apply in the case of rape. So you need a second argument to go on top of that, which I'll say in a moment. But yeah, so the responsibility objection, of course, is that with the violinist, you are not responsible for the kidney ailment that the violinist has. And so you do not have a moral responsibility to be plugged into that violinist and filter your blood through his kidneys. If you remain plugged in, that's a supererogatory act, or you're going above and beyond the call of duty. That's essentially a morally heroic act, we would call it. But you don't have an obligation to remain plugged into that violinist. Now, there are a number of disanalogies between the violinist scenario and pregnancy. That's the problem, is that pregnancy is such a unique situation that there's really nothing you can come up with to analogize properly to pregnancy. Even the violinist breaks down in key ways, and one of those ways is the responsibility. And when a woman finds herself pregnant, she is responsible for the creation of the fetus, and she's responsible for placing that fetus in a state of dependence upon her. Because she's responsible for those two things, she owes the fetus. She owes the fetus. What's the word I'm looking for? Well, there's a word I'm looking for, but I'm blanking on it. But basically, the idea is that she owes the fetus, proper care. She owes the fetus the use of her body in order to keep the fetus alive, because that is the natural state of pregnancy, and she's the one who engaged in an act that created the fetus and placed the fetus in a state of dependence upon her. So she owes that to the fetus. The fetus has a natural right to that. Now, of course, there's the case of rape, in which case a woman did not engage in an act that caused the creation and state of dependence of the fetus. But also, when a pro-life person says that a woman should not be able to abort in that situation, the pro-life person is not trying to force dependence on the woman. The rapist did that. So when we talk about abortions in the case of rape, it's a very, very terrible, very tragic situation, one that we need to be very careful with, because we don't want people to think that we're uncaring about that kind of situation. We do care about women who've been raped. They should be referred to for the proper counseling. In fact, Warren Hearn, a late-term abortion provider, wrote one of the most used textbooks on abortion. He actually says that if a woman is raped, she's not going to be helped by the abortion clinic setting. She needs to be referred for proper counseling. Now, of course, he thinks that you should do an abortion if she wants one, if she's been raped, but the abortion itself is not going to help a rape victim. She needs to be referred to for proper counseling for that. And of course, since I'm pro-life, I would take it even further, and I would say, she's not going to be helped by the abortion, but there are other reasons why she shouldn't have an abortion too. Like, she's going to compound one act of violence, the abortion, on top of another, the rape. And oftentimes, when we hear women give a testimony about having an abortion when she was raped, oftentimes we hear that the abortion was worse than the rape, because this was an act of violence that she consented to. She didn't consent to the rape, but she consented to the abortion, which means that now she was responsible for an act of violence on this fetus, just because of the act of violence that was perpetrated on her. So there are a lot of reasons why we should actually say, we don't think an abortion will be the best thing for you. So I think it would help the woman in that situation to prevent her from having an abortion. But also, there's just the aspect of, it's very unfortunate, and we need to help you and give you as much compassionate care as we can. But in order to remove the fetus, we would have to kill the fetus. We have to kill an innocent person to remove that person from your body. And that's just not something that we are permitted to do. That's not a lack of compassion on our part. It's an unwillingness to commit murder for the benefit of somebody else.
Yeah, that's for anybody that's watching, this is, as Clinton said, this is not something that, pro-lifers take flippantly or lightly. This is a hard area to have to talk about. But it's something that needs to be talked about, because at the end of the day, we still have innocent lives that are being taken. And So with, honestly, I meet lots of Christians who are pro-life, except for rape or incest or, these. And what I explain to them is, I'm like, look, if you're going to have a consistent standard and a consistent philosophy, we can't allow, in these situations, as tragic as they are, it still doesn't follow that they're not an innocent human organism that deserves the basic right of living, you know. And so also in these situations, like you said, compounding the violence, it's another violent act. And one of the points that I bring up when we're talking about like in rape scenarios or something like that is oh, I hear you. Uh the
Sorry, that was my dog, Roxy. I
No,
muted
it's all
the microphone to prevent her from coming over the mic.
it's all good. Honestly, mine are right outside my wall here, and I'm usually having to mute mine in between because they won't shut up. But yeah, so when we're talking
Yeah, I
about
mean, I'm guessing a leaf was rolling along the grass. That's what she was barking.
yeah, so when we're talking about this, I think something that doesn't get brought up the most enough is the studies on mental health of women who have abortions. So when you have this, first of all, you usually hear them say, well, that's going to be a constant reminder. Well, I can tell you now, a woman that's been raped is not going to forget it anyway. It's not something she just forgets because, the fetus is gone, the child is gone. It doesn't work like that. It's something that they live with their whole life and have to deal with. Well, when we look at the statistics of, the rate of depression, the rate of suicide, the rate of anxiety disorders, all these different things that follows from women who have had abortions, it seems like an abortion just compounds the difficulty she's going to have in the long run. And I hate how people pro-choice, and not people specifically themselves, but organizations and things of that nature try to normalize, abortion as much as they can to make it not seem like us. And they literally gloss over and don't talk about the mental effects of it. And I've seen firsthand people I know who have dealt with and have said many, many years down the road after, it's something they still struggle with. It's something they still deal with. And one of the people happened to be close to me, and to this day was pro-choice, even after having all of this anguish from it and depression and dealing, which obviously continues to bother her because she still talks about it, but still pro-choice. And I'm blown away by it. But I hate how we don't talk about the mental health aspect enough of it.
Yeah. No, I'm not too read up on the mental health aspects. So, I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but there are organizations you can look at who do. I know there's, David Reardon, who's written a book and several articles on mental health. But I've also heard from other pro-life people that his work might not be the most rigorous. So you might need to take his work with a grain of salt. But when it comes to the organizations that talk about the women who've been raped and their reactions to abortion and things like that. One organization that does good work that I found is Feminists for Life. They've talked to women who've been raped and who've had abortions and who rejected abortion after rape. And oftentimes what they hear is that for a woman who kept the child instead of having the abortion, that the child is the only good thing to come out of the rape. This is true of any terrible situation in life. In fact, Stephanie Gray Connors, who's a friend of mine, now you may be familiar with the name. She used to live in Canada, but she recently got married and moved to Florida. So she's a Canadian American now. But she has written about this too, and talks about how when it comes to a situation in life, what matters is your perspective on it. And so if you're able to change your perspective, then suddenly a terrible situation can be a lot more bearable. And now, obviously, this is I'm not a counselor or a psychologist, so I can't tell anyone how to recover after they've been raped, and nor would I try to. But what we often see is that for women who have been raped and who are able to receive counseling and understand that the child that resulted from the rape is as a second victim of the rape, because he's been brought to existence in a situation that's not ideal, because she was raped, and it wasn't a loving situation between her and her boyfriend or husband. So it's not an ideal situation he was brought into existence, but also considering abortion, that takes the life of the child who was not in existence through any fault of his own. So if you understand that the child is another victim of the rape, and just understand that a lot of women actually think that keeping the child actually helped them to recover emotionally from the rape. And like you say, it's not something that they're ever going to be able to forget, but there are ways that they can learn to cope with it. And like I said, I'm not a counselor or psychologist, so I wouldn't try to speak to that. That's something that they would need to see a licensed psychologist for.
Right. Absolutely. Great advice. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, a lot of people that are in the pro-life are also bioethicists, which is what you're into, is the whole value of life from the beginning to the end. And today we are running into more and more people who are okay with, assisted suicide and things of that nature. So just, if you could, just a quick summary of some of the issues that we run into when we allow, assisted suicide, or as some people would refer to, euthanasia, things of that nature.
Yeah, well, the thing to understand about assisted suicide and euthanasia is that the only difference between them is in how active the doctor is in your death. Physician-assisted suicide, the doctor will prescribe pills, and then you go home and take them at your leisure. And euthanasia is where the doctor actually, injects you with the lethal injection that ends your life. And so in that case, the doctor directly kills you, as opposed to indirectly through assisted suicide. And so that leads a number of people, who write on the issue to say, there really is no moral difference between assisted suicide and euthanasia, because either way, the doctor is killing you. So whether he's doing it directly or indirectly, the doctor is responsible for your death. And then, of course, euthanasia has two different flavors. There's voluntary euthanasia, where when you're of sound mind, you indicate that you want to, be taken off life support, or to have your life ended if you reach such a state. And then there's involuntary euthanasia, which often results from voluntary euthanasia. And involuntary euthanasia is just the doctor ends your life when he deems that your life is no longer worth living, or you're taking up too much space in the hospital, they need the beds and things like that. And when you start giving doctors the ability to make decisions over life and death, they start taking more of it. And that's just human nature. So legalizing euthanasia and assisted suicide is actually dangerous, because of the way that it often goes, that there is a slippery slope there, that legalizing voluntary euthanasia often leads to involuntary euthanasia. And so there are a couple of key questions about whether or not euthanasia is permissible. And that's number one, is suicide permissible? And if it is, that leads to a further question: is somebody else killing you when you want to die permissible? Because, assisted suicide is not really an act of suicide. It's an act of the doctor killing you. So with physician-assisted suicide or with euthanasia, you're actually bringing a second party into your suicide, and you're not actually killing yourself. The other person is killing you. So so that's a major issue with that as well. Is that most people think suicide is wrong, but now we're bringing a second party into this act of suicide. So that's one question. And then, of course, the other question is do we have a right to die? And if so, under what circumstances do we have a right to die? And it seems like, I would say that no, there is no right to die, because human beings have a right to life, and rights are inalienable, meaning that you can't take them away, but you also can't rightly give them away. So if there's a right to life, that means that there can't be a right to die, because you don't have it's not permissible for you to frustrate your rights. And so if you have a right to life, then killing yourself is actually a frustration of your right and a frustration of your ability to flourish in the way that humans ought to flourish. Because killing you is never a benefit to you, even if you're suffering, even if you're terminally ill. Killing you is never a benefit. In fact, killing you is the ultimate harm that you can do to anybody. It doesn't become a benefit just because doctors can't heal you from your situation. So killing you takes away any ability for you to ever get better. And it also negates any incentive for doctors to find a cure or a treatment, because if it's cheaper and easier to kill you, then that's the position that they'll go down, especially your insurance provider. And we have real world examples of this too. I think of Randy Stroop, who was a citizen in Oregon, one of the first states in the U.S. to legalize assisted suicide. And there was a documentary called "How to Die in Oregon," and you can actually find his interview on YouTube. And he talks about how he had cancer and he wanted to get chemotherapy to try and get it cured. His insurance company rejected his chemotherapy, but approved paying for suicide pills. And then once he went public with it, there was such an outcry about it that they finally greenlit his chemotherapy. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and he still ended up dying of the cancer. But the problem is that the doctor and the insurance company didn't even try. They just wrote him off and wouldn't give him the chemotherapy, but would actually pay for his suicide pills. So, there's just a lot of things that are wrong with euthanasia from a moral perspective, because it's wrong to kill people, and from a pragmatic perspective, because the more doctors are able to kill, the more they'll take that privilege. And not only that, but if it's cheaper and easier to kill you, that's the route they'll go down. And not only does it negate any ability for you ever to get better, but it also diminishes any incentive to find treatments or cures for these ailments.
Yeah, and for my fallacy scorekeepers out there, slippery slope is not always a fallacy, because they're
right.
all, when we have actual evidence that leads towards it or examples in the past, it's not a fallacy. So that's
essentially a slippery slope is not a fallacy if there's warrant for the slippery slope, and there is most definitely warrant for this slippery slope.
It's when they use it to go to extremes with it. So,
right.
So that was my thing. I was actually having this conversation with my dad earlier, because, I've had, we've all had illnesses over time. And, sometimes I'm sure most people has had one that they literally felt like they were dying, it's just that bad. And it's moments like that can make you sympathize, with cancer patients and things of that nature. So
and here's the thing too, is that nobody wants to die. That's not the natural state of how you're living. So someone who's terminally ill and suffering only wants to die insofar as they are suffering. If you're able to alleviate their suffering, they no longer want to die if you're able to manage it. And in the vast majority of cases, we're able to manage pain medications, even if you have to just increase the dose to make the dose more potent. That's something we can do too. And they've done studies in Oregon and Washington also who legalized assisted suicide. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the number one reason that the people in the survey wanted to die was because they felt like they were being a burden to their family members. So assisted suicide can also make people choose suicide who wouldn't choose suicide otherwise, because they feel like they're being a burden to the people by not going through with the suicide. And also, again, people who are suffering, want to kill themselves because they want, they don't want to die. They want the suffering to end. And so that's the problem as well. And here's the thing, that even though we would say assisted suicide and euthanasia are impermissible, that doesn't mean that it's always wrong to act in such a way that the death of the patient is foreseeable. You must never intend the death of the patient. But if the death is is foreseen, that could be permissible. For example, if you're trying to treat someone's pain, but you know that increasing the pain medication will shorten the patient's life, it's still permissible to increase the dosage because, number one, your intention is not to kill the patient. Your intention is not to shorten his life. Your intention is to ease his suffering. And so since your intention is to ease the suffering, it's permissible to increase the dosage because even though the shortening of his life will be foreseen, it's not intended by the doctor. So there's still situations in which you might act in such a way as to shorten the patient's life in order to ease his suffering as well.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. You know, and that's something that a lot of people don't take into account. You know, intentionality, it means a lot. I mean, that's why we have degrees when people are killed. That's why we have manslaughter, murder 1, murder 2. It's because of the intentionality that's there. I mean, the intentionality makes all the difference in the world. So, kind of going back to pro-life, pro-choice arguments, when we have to remove a fetus to save the life of a woman, we're not trying to kill the fetus. We're trying to save the life of the woman who at that point is more viable because more than likely both of them are going to die. It's rare that you get, a fetus that survives and not the mother. It's usually it's both of them die. So it's one of those things where we have to make a judgment of what's more valuable. But one of the points I wanted to kind of hone in on that you brought up was a lot of people don't realize, and I hate how politicized it got when they were talking about like a single payer healthcare system and all of that, and I'm not getting into the politics, but what happens is the reality of it is we have, quote unquote, and I hate the way that they sensationalize it so much, but we have death panels. And they're already there with insurance companies. They have to make these judgments of, who they're going to pay this money to, who gets, when there's a lot. So when we turn that over to our government, and I'm not advocating, for single payer or against it. I'm not speaking on that at all. But if it gets to the point where we do have our government with a single payer system or something like that, that's something we need to think about, how inefficient our politicians handle money now. Do we really want them making the decisions at who gets to live or who gets money, to keep them living versus those who can't? And these are all the scenarios that we get into when we start talking about assisted suicide, euthanasia, and all these different things. Is, it's going to be a lot cheaper to, give to have an assisted suicide than it is to actually keep them alive and give them the medical that they need. And this kind of takes me into the next point, and that's the vegetative and persistent vegetative states. And I think a lot of people don't realize that we actually have people that come out of these states. I mean, there's on a persistent vegetative, I haven't looked at the numbers in a long time, but I think it's a really small number. But we still have people that do come out.
It's not something you should expect to happen, but it is something that happens. But in fact, that's a difference that's important in this discussion too. Is a persistent vegetative state is different from brain death. Now, brain death is a misnomer because if you're brain dead, you're not actually dead. You're still alive. You're dying, but scientists and doctors can still keep your body alive artificially, and that's in fact that's how they do organ donations. They keep your body alive with life support, and then take your organs out. But you're still a living human being at that point. Just like you are in a persistent vegetative state. Now, in a persistent vegetative state, you've lost all of your higher brain functions, but your lower brain functions are still functioning. So in a persistent vegetative state, you're still able to do a few things. You're able to. I hope I don't get one of my facts wrong. We just decided on doing this podcast last night, tonight. So I didn't get a chance to look at the actual thing. But if I recall correctly, things like I believe someone in a persistent vegetative state can breathe on their own, they can swallow, they can blink their eyes, and they can move through stages of wakefulness and sleep. So, so there's still some stuff going on there, but they're not able to feed themselves. They're not able to get up out of bed. They're not able to, use the restroom on their own, things like that. So someone in a persistent vegetative state is still a living human being. And yeah, there have been rare occasions in which someone has come out of it, but also people in persistent vegetative states have lived for 20 or 30 years in that state. So someone who's in that state is still a living human being, and so they still have, we still have obligations to treat them as such. And if you're going to turn someone in a persistent vegetative state into a cadaver, you have to kill them. You starve them or give them an injection or something, but you have to kill them in order to turn them into a cadaver. They're still a living human being who can still live for decades, even in the state they're in. Someone who is brain dead is dying and will die if you allow nature to take its course. Like when they turn you off of life support and your body just kind of shuts down and then you die. So you're in a state of dying. And so the reason they call it brain death is because essentially doctors use that state in order to justify removing your organs and giving them to people who need replacements. So those are important things. That's an important distinction to keep in mind too, is the distinction between a persistent vegetative state,
right,
and brain death.
Yeah, and I knew you were a champ and you got all this, so it didn't matter if it was 2 hours before. I knew you could handle it. But
no, it's fine. Yeah. I wanted to say, just in case I happened to get a fact wrong, I wanted to make that qualification.
Yeah,
but no, because actually, one of the most gratifying things about my speeches is I often do have nurses and doctors in attendance, and every time I've asked them after a talk, they'll come up and talk with me a little bit, and I'll ask them if I got all my facts right, and every time they say, yeah, you got it. So that makes me that helps me keep me on the right track, because I have the doctors and nurses telling me that I've got my facts correct. So hopefully that'll help with my credibility and credentials.
I appreciate you putting that qualifier in there, because I can attest that and I don't mean this in any kind of flattery, but you're a very intellectually honest and humble person, and I think you showed that in the podcast with Cameron Bertuzzi when you agreed to go on an absolute giant in annihilationism. But hey, man,
I went on and
go ahead. No.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I watched.
No, I was just going to say, I went on.
Oh, I'm sorry. We definitely have a delay. Go ahead, man.
Okay, I was just gonna say I went on there, to have a discussion with Chris Date, and just about everyone I talked to said, he really knows his stuff. Make sure you prepare. And so I prepared as much as I could, and man, like his depth of knowledge on that issue, even though I think he's wrong, his depth of knowledge on that issue is very impressive. So yeah.
Well, I must say, he convinced me. So I went into annihilationism. Kicking and screaming, because I like to hold to kind of what I consider traditional things. So, but back. So anyway, thanks for the qualifier. Yes, I did spring this on him last minute because we were supposed to do it last week, and I had a whole bunch of stuff happen, and I just couldn't do it. But he's a champ.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not like complaining or anything. I'm happy.
No, I know.
I just right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So and like I said, I mean, honestly, I mean, you're a really intellectually humble guy. That's why just about anything. I mean, I don't stalk you, but if I see something and you're on there talking about it, a lot of times I'll watch it. I spend a whole lot of time watching a lot of podcasts, YouTube shows, and all this stuff now because there's so much great content out there now. But with the like we were talking about with, and I wanted to kind of touch back on that real quick was, so for my understanding is I believe it's the brainstem or the back or lower part of the brain that is involved with involuntary functions such as breathing and things of this nature. So when you're talking about higher order, The lower order would be the involuntary, right? And then the higher order would be like the reasoning and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. So the higher order brain function is lost, but your lower order brain function is retained when you're in a persistent vegetative state, which is why you're able to continue breathing and swallowing and things like that. But when you're brain dead, you've irreversibly lost all of your brain functions, higher and lower, and you need your brain to regulate all of your organs and everything in your body. So your body starts to shut down at that point, and there's no way to come out of it. If the doctor proclaims that you were brain dead and you came out of it, you were misdiagnosed. So
yeah,
just to be just to be frank there, but
yeah. So yeah,
because doctors are human too. Doctors are human too, and so they make mistakes, and that's just a part of life. So they could misdiagnose things too. They do their best, but they can't always stuff happens, and sometimes they misdiagnose things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's this is a discussion I've had with my wife before. HVAC was my background, and now I work on power equipment for data centers. And I tell her, when you see so many different symptoms of something, you feel like intuitionally automatically what's wrong, and most times you're right. But you always get that trouble equipment, and you have to kind of go through a process of elimination, and they're like mechanics with an extremely complex machine, so they can't get it right all the time. There's a lot of human error, and most people don't realize, as much as we know about the human anatomy and modern medicine and all these different things, we don't know far more than what we do know. And so that's what I was one of the things I wanted to get at was like with consciousness, when we're talking about vegetative states, persistent vegetative states, a lot of people have to understand that we don't know what's going on inside that subjective experience. What qualia is there, because we can only measure certain activities and that's going on in the brain. So we really don't know what that subjective experience is that's there.
Yeah, and what I find bizarre is that scientists are still discovering new bones in the body too. You'd think with all the times that doctors go in and operate on people, it's like they know everything that's in there, but they still occasionally make new discoveries about what's inside the body. So there's still always new things, new things to learn. Even even in things like just what kind of organs and bones are in the human body. Yeah,
absolutely. And this is back in the going back with the abortion pro-choice pro-life thing is I've heard a lot of people with these personhood arguments, they rely a lot on neuroscience. And I'm like, man, you really need to look into neuroscience. One, we don't know a lot of what we think we know. Not only that, and I don't mean this is my disclaimer. Okay. I'm a science person, so I don't mean this in any anti-science way, but neuroscience has been extremely plagued with inaccurate articles and findings, because it's like a race to peer review. And unfortunately, this is one of the fields that, because it's such a cutting edge new technology field, a lot of people race out there. They had this idea that certain chemicals had one function.
Good job.
They had this idea that chemicals all had, they were stuck on this single idea that chemicals had one function. And now we've gone back and realize, hey, these chemicals play massive roles in the body. That's not just one function. Well, for everyone, that serotonin, neuroepinephrine, dopamines, all these different neurotransmitters that were supposedly, one function, maybe two, they're having to retract a lot of that from like the 80s and 90s, because now we realize that it's there's so much more involved in it, and there's still so much more that we don't know. But so with all that said, we're just over the hour mark, so we got to get to the important questions. Okay. What music is on your iPhone right now?
Oh, Well, I'm a classically trained musician, so I actually like a wide variety of music. I listen to classical, I listen to rock and roll, especially classic rock, and so I also like the best of both worlds, progressive rock, which is I kind of consider the progressive rock bands kind of the orchestras of today, even though we have some wonderful orchestras around who are performing music, and of course still new music being composed in the classical field. But on my iPod, I have a band called Glass Hammer, which is a progressive rock, a Christian progressive rock band who actually a lot of their music is inspired by literature like J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis,
Right.
fantasy authors, and sometimes they write their own original materials, stories too. uh, Neil Morris and his various bands, like Neil Morris Band and Transatlantic, are on there. Kansas, one of my all-time favorite bands. They I've got their three latest albums. Somewhere to Elsewhere, The Absence of Presence, and what was there? The one between that. I'm forgetting the name of it, but those three albums and a couple of live albums are on my iPod too. So I've got quite a bit of progressive rock on there.
Yeah, so I want everybody to know, okay, because one of the shows I did it. Well, now it's Clinton. I said iPhone, he said iPod. So he's the old cat here, not me.
Oh,
But
sorry. I do have it on my iPhone.
I got
Yeah.
a lot of rift
So
for saying iPod on one of my shows when I asked somebody that, and I was like, "Wow, that's right, iPod. Who has an iPod?" So and also uh, for a lot of people who don't know, um, Clinton is extremely musically talented himself. So not only is he this handsome devil over here with a gorgeous beard. First of all, you're the first beard to rival mine yet. And there was already
okay.
comments out there about, hey man, would they do finally usually it's my beard they're talking about, and they're talking about
Yeah.
yours. So you got something done tonight.
Oh,
But I did see a video
yeah.
that you put on Facebook, you playing piano and singing, and I was stunned. I mean, not that I didn't know what to expect, and you really blew me away. And I mean, bro, you've got a fantastic singing voice, and along with the man, see, I do vocals, and a lot of people don't know that I do
Yeah.
vocals, but I do it for me. I don't do it publicly. I don't send it out. It's a passion of mine. I love it. I have recording equipment. I got a digital audio workstation and all that because that's one of my releases. I love vocals. I
Mm.
love music, and I
Yeah.
kind of just let it all out there. So I was extremely impressed, man. You did a fantastic job.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, because those were just kind of something I threw together without much practice. I just kind of learned them and did them. I do perform live with bands,
Hmm.
and then of course I spend a lot of time rehearsing the music before going live. But yeah, so yeah, I really consider myself more a live performer than a recording performer because I do not like my voice recorded. So I think
Hey,
I think I sound a lot better live than recorded.
I actually, so when I first got all of this recording equipment, and I
Mm,
started recording my singing because I wanted to improve it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Or my voice was terrible, not the singing. I knew, a lot of people don't realize that almost
mm,
everybody can sing because your voice is an instrument. You just have to learn how
yeah,
to play the instrument and take care of it properly. And so while I'm
right.
recording, I'm like, man, what? So my wife's like, you sound fantastic. And I'm like, what are you hearing? So I actually Googled it, and it's
Yeah,
actually a common phenomenon is when people hear their voices recorded, they're so used to their
mm,
head voice that when they hear their voice, they can't believe it sounds like that. And it takes a long time to get
yeah,
used to that recorded sound that you're not used to hearing. So
yeah.
yeah,
And the
that was
thing is,
hard to get over.
Yeah, and my voice, my speaking voice, is a lot higher than I'm comfortable with. I wish I had a deeper voice, but when I was at my old church, I attended a Lutheran church, and we had a vocal teacher there, and he actually gave me a few vocal lessons. And yeah, he basically said, you speak in your singing voice, which is actually good. So I guess I can't complain because it's the range that I sing in. So I
Well,
guess it's a
I'll tell
benefit.
you this. There's
So.
no such thing as the curse of the soprano or the alto or any of that, because that's the voice everybody wants to hear. What you have
Yeah.
the curse is the baritone, which is exactly where my range is. So
Uh,
I have to work like really hard to increase that range, because there's very
mm.
few people that sound. I mean, you're just not going to go mainstream with a deep singing voice. There's only very few
Not,
people that do that. So
yeah, not unless
uh,
you're Mac Powell.
yeah, or it's who's the guy who does the Old Man River? Old Man River, so unless you're
Yeah,
somebody that's super special, it's not happening.
right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so all right, and the last question is that I have for you,
Hmm.
and this is for my personal interest. Um,
Okay.
who is your favorite theologian?
Uh, what do you consider a theologian?
Mm, yeah, let's gum. Let's make it a little easier. Who's your favorite preacher, pastor?
Oh, I don't actually listen to a lot of pastors,
I don't either.
because I get my preaching. What's that?
I said I don't
Oh,
either. So.
because oh, yeah, because I get my preaching on Sunday morning, and then when I listen to someone talk about the word, I want them to go deeper. So I like to listen to philosophers and
Yeah.
theologians, people who are like conversant with the early church and that kind of thing. So yeah, so I guess because I don't really have you know there's some preachers I've heard of, like Billy Sunday and Jonathan Edwards, but I don't know if I necessarily call myself a fan of theirs. So if I just use my own kind of definition of theologian, I mean C.S. Lewis wasn't really a theologian, but he was very theologically inclined. And very philosophical too. So he's definitely my favorite author of the 20th century. Um, you know, uh, I mean, William Lane Craig. I don't agree
Oh,
with everything he believes. In fact, there are a lot of things that Dr. Craig would take issue with me because I'm a hylomorphist. Yeah, but he definitely has had a really great impact with the church. So yeah, those are a couple of my favorite theologians.
yeah, that's fantastic, because I actually lean heavily to hylomorphism. I think
Okay.
substance dualism has, some issues that we just don't have good explanations for. And I'm obviously not going to be a physicalist. So, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
Craig.
Although Chris Date is a physicalist,
Really?
as is
Oh,
yeah,
yes,
as
I
is
heard
Glenn
that in the
Peebles.
conversation. So how does it, I mean, just real
Mhm.
quick, how does that work? How is one, I think he even went as far as to say he was a materialist, didn't he?
I think so, and yeah, that's part of the issue. Is part of our disagreement was, I'm a hylomorphist, which means I believe in an eternal soul, and Chris doesn't. He's a physicalist. So, if you get resurrected, he believes that you'll get burned up in hell. I believe you won't, because you have an eternal soul that's not going to die while you're there. And so I think that's something that we would need to, and that's more my wheelhouse too, because I'm involved in bioethics, which questions of identity and the soul and things like that are very important to that issue. So so I told Cameron and Chris, look, maybe we should come back and debate physicalism versus hylomorphism or something. That'd be more, I'd be a lot better in that kind of situation too. But yeah, so I'm not entirely sure. You'd have to ask Chris about all of
Yeah.
that related to that. But I think that's a big part of it, in that he doesn't believe in an eternal soul. So that's why the body would get burned up in the fires of hell. Whereas I believe in an eternal soul, so I don't think it will. But
I think, well, I wouldn't,
yeah,
I think from my understanding, I would say he's conditional immortality. So there
right.
is
That's what he calls his.
immortality. Yeah, yeah. So he does believe in eternal soul for heaven, just not
Right, right.
for hell, yeah, because that's kind of where I'm at. And if he didn't believe in eternal soul for at least for heaven, then I'd have to bounce out from him. So
No, yeah, he's definitely he's a conditional immortality guy.
okay,
So he definitely believes in eternal life for Christians. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't normally address the chat during the show, but somebody had the audacity to say that one of somebody's favorite theologian, I'm sure it's a joke because it's atheist Frank, he's a real cool guy, but he said Ken Hovind.
Oh, I'm familiar with. Yeah, there was a time that I was actually into Answers in Genesis for a while. Because I used to be a young Earth creationist. I'm no longer
I
a
did
young
too.
Earth creationist.
I absolutely was too.
Yeah, William Lane Craig has actually changed my mind on that. Because I agreed that I think scientifically the evidence for an old Earth is a lot stronger than the evidence for a young Earth. It was just the scriptural issues that I had to hang up with, and Dr. Craig really helped me see, how an old Earth perspective can make sense of the texts that young Earth creationists use. And there's nothing wrong with allowing scientific discoveries to affect our view of scripture, like we do when we talk about Joshua and the sun standing still in the sky and things like that, as long as they're, because obviously, there are exceptions to it, things that are clearly taught in scripture, we can't just avoid because, we like a scientific explanation better. But considering that Genesis 1, was written originally in Hebrew, and the day could have different meanings. We're not locked into a belief in a young Earth. In fact, even early church fathers who didn't have the scientific advancements of today would say, it's not necessarily, we're not committed to a young Earth view based on Genesis 1. So,
So man, that is just crazy how many similarities we have. It's I was actually a young Earth creationist at one time, and I advocated for it and fought for it vehemently, and I don't know if you're familiar with Hank Hanegraaff, but that's who changed my position.
Yeah. Okay, because I've actually published a few articles for the Christian Research Journal.
Oh, that's right. I've actually read your articles there for Christian Research Institute. Yeah, that's right. I forgot. I saw some. Yeah, I did see some. So he, what got me was I think it was 1985 or 87 a supernova, and what he had said was, so it's like 600,000 light years away. So it took 600,000 years for us to be able to, or the light to travel to Earth, for us to be able to view the supernova that happened 600,000 years ago. Well, that totally dumped 6,000 to 10,000 years immediately. And unless God created the world with the appearance of age, which I was okay with at the time. But then he said the conundrum is...
the appearance of... the appearance of age view was how I got around things like that. That was my position.
Right. Well, so he brought up this conundrum. He said, if you hold to the appearance of age view, well, then one, we're borderline talking about God being a deceiver, because he tells us to look to the heavens for his majesty and his handiwork and all these things. So if they look old, but they're really not old, then we're being misled about it. And his wasn't as radical as that. It was a lot more humble than that. And the other one was, the second issue is, how do we, if everything was created with the appearance of age, how do we know we weren't created last week with all of these memories and knowledge imprinted in our heads? And I'm like, wow, that does make a lot of sense. How do we know that? If we're going to take that view, that's really what got me, moving away from. And then what he also said was, this was the biggest thing that he had said. If young Earth creationism wasn't true, does that affect who Jesus is or what he did? And I was like, wow. Yeah, no, it really does. It just affects my interpretation of scripture.
Right.
and so that's what kind of got me moving out of that. But
Yeah, and believers in the young earth view can also push people away from Scripture too, from push people away from God by proclaiming that you have to be a young earth creationist if you're a Christian, because that's the only possible interpretation you can get from Scripture, and you're not letting God speak for Himself. You're trusting man's word over God if you try to go with an old earth interpretation. So there's that kind of issue too. Is that
So yeah, absolutely. So Clinton, man, thank you so much for coming on here. I appreciate you spending
my
the
pleasure.
time with us and your expertise. And so everybody understands this is not meant to be flattery, but Clinton has actually been a huge inspiration on my because I've always been really into pro-life stuff. My wife will tell you. I'm 42. My wife and I got married when I was 21, and we've been together since I was 16. So she's seen every avenue of me, every 52 shades of me, because I'm ADD as it gets also. So I'm like, yeah, on topics and things like that. So she's followed me all the way, like chasing kids through a grocery store. She's like, bro, slow down, slow down. But she'll tell you, and so yeah, I mean, being in the same philosophy groups, being friends on Facebook, and just reading a lot of the things that you did. And Clinton, like I am, is mostly self-taught, and that to me is extremely admirable, because going down that road myself, I know how hard it is.
Yeah, it also means it's very, very hard to find work when you don't have those degrees behind the name.
Yeah, so that's kind of the issue I'm having right now where I work. I've been at my company for 14 years, and I put in for the next job up, and it's a whole bunch of people with degrees, hiring for that position. And it's like, dang, I don't have a degree. And so it doesn't matter to have all that experience, because which I understand, if you have a foundational knowledge to build upon and the experience, I can't argue with them. So they got to do what's best for the company. But so I've admired your work. Like I said, you're a intellectually humble guy. You're humble overall. Really appreciate that. And I am so happy and thankful that you came on here to spend time with us.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on here to chat for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. We are definitely going to have you back at some point if your schedule allows. I know you're going through that whole move and everything. I won't dox you, but I know you left California where you were almost on welfare because of their taxes.
Right. Actually, it's a little nerve-wracking of a move, because I was actually working doing music for my church, and now that I've moved, I don't have any steady income coming in right now. So
wow.
I'm trying to find work that I can do from home, because the reason that I moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and the reason that I moved here is to homeschool my nieces, which means that I'm not going to be able to get a standard 9-to-5 job and be able to homeschool them. So I'm trying to find work doing music. I have a couple leads that I've got here in town, and I'm trying to find other work that I can do from home too, things like transcription work and things like that, on top of the pro-life work that I do. Because if I'm able to get a place to bring me out to speak, I can charge a stipend and travel expenses. But for the most part, I mean, as long as there are, people who are a lot more popular in the movement, you got your Scott Klusendorf, you got your Josh Brahm, all those kinds of guys who are like, monsters in the movement, and, they're in high demand. A little bit more difficult for someone like me to find steady work doing that. But yeah.
So if I have anybody listening that's in the Las Cruces, New Mexico area, which I've actually been there, my company, with my company, I have traveled all around the U.S. except the Pacific Northwest, and I've spent way too much time in California, every spot of California. But I got stuck in El Paso, Texas, working at Fort Bliss for like a 2-week job. And since I was stuck there over the weekend, I took a cruise through New Mexico. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna find some mountains. And yeah, I didn't find mountains for like until I got to Las Cruces. And it was like, and that's not much of mountains, you know. So
right. Yeah, being from California, I can tell you about mountains. You know, by the way, you're welcome, Amber. I'm assuming that's your wife, Amber Kroom.
yeah, that's her. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, California, there's mountains all over the place, and yeah, in fact, to get to Las Cruces, you know, you can't just drive as the crow flies. If you could, you know, it'd be a lot shorter. But as it is, it takes about 7 or 8 hours to get out of California, because I was right in the middle of California. But I had to drive over mountains through most of it. So yeah, we got some mountain ranges in California.
You got to go to the White Sands missile testing area while you're there.
I've been to White Sands. I don't know if I've been to the testing area though.
Oh, so okay. I'm sorry. I got to tell this story real quick before you go. I was in El Paso, right? And I was stuck for the weekend. So I'm like, I'm going to take a cruise through New Mexico, see what's over there, try to find some mountains or something. So I'm driving down I-10, and I didn't know that far away from the border, they had border checkpoints. And so I'm driving down 10, and all of a sudden I see this huge pavilion on the side. There's like little, you know, cameras or whatever, just all these gadgets on the side of it. And the interstate was blocked, and you had to go on over. So I go on into it, and it's a border checkpoint. And so as I come in, the guy says, where are you headed? And I was like, nowhere in particular. Well, that was strike one. And then he said, is this your car? I said, it's a rental. That was strike two. And then he was like, can you pop the trunk and let me look inside of it? You know, this is a border patrol dressed like a soldier. And so I popped the trunk. I had my tools and my duffel safety bag in there. That was strike three. And he said, I need you to pull over here on the side for a minute. And let me tell you something, okay? I really feel minorities when they have to go through this, because as a white guy, I was scared to death. I was like, please don't let this be like some drug smuggler's rental car who left something in there or something. And so they put the dog in the car and let him run all around in the car and stuff. And I'm like, and then finally the dog popped out. He said, you're free to go. And I was just like, that was crazy. That was one hell of an experience. I don't want to do that again. Right. So
yeah, because you know, Las Cruces is real close to the Mexico border, and so because like you know, going down I-10 toward Arizona, you'll hit border patrol. Going up I-70 toward Alamogordo, you'll hit border patrol, and they're all over the place. So
for anybody who has an issue with like minorities being freaked out that, you know, soldiers or what looks like soldiers is, you know, searching their vehicle, I was. So it's there's a lot of things that kind of goes through your head. So Clinton, I wish you the best. I hope you find a steady bit of work. I'll be praying for you. I really appreciate you coming on here, sharing your knowledge with us and things like that. And I would definitely like to have you on again for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again for having me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No problem, man. I will talk to you later, and I am going to see all these people out.
All right.
All right, bud. So that was Clinton Wilcox. I would say a friend, but we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking personally. But like I said in the beginning, he had a huge impact on, I was really interested in pro-life philosophy, things of this nature. And he was one of the first people that I ran across that really had an academic level understanding or arguments for the pro-life position. And when I got turned on to that, I was like, whoa, check this out. And when I really found out that you don't have to take a theistic argument, because while I am a Christian, I think it's important to have arguments that can relate across the board. You know, whether somebody's agnostic, atheist, different religion, you know, whatever it is, we need arguments that everybody can understand. And through Clinton, you know, I have, you know, run across people like Scott Klusendorf and Francis J. Beckwith and all these people that he has, you know, recommended to me, and they are fantastic scholars on these issues. So if you get a chance or you're interested in it, check them out. Check out Clinton at Life Training Institute. He does some writing for Secular Pro-Life, and I'll tell you personally, stupid microphone. I'll tell you personally that Secular Pro-Life has a lot of good stuff over there. So if you think it's just a Christian or theistic thing for pro-life, I know quite a few atheists that are pro-life, and Secular Pro-Life is exactly what the name says, Secular Pro-Life, and they have a massive group over there. Also, check this out. So you've seen me sipping on this. Look at that. I am fixing to have merchandise, at least stupid autofocus, at least for me to look cool on the show. But I'm also going to have links there. So just in case you think I'm cool enough or my show's cool enough that you want to rock some of my gear, it'll be there. I appreciate everybody hanging out with us. It's been fantastic. I love this discussion. And, you know, I am so humbled by, I don't care, you know, like right now it says I got 6 viewers. I don't care, because I know there are lots of people who's going to watch this later, may learn something. And it's not the people that's watching now, and it's not the people that's talking that always makes a difference. It's those, or that you make a difference too. It's those who, what we call lurkers, that a lot of times that's where we make the difference. And I know that because I'm a former lurker. I spent a lot of time in a philosophy group, had no idea where to start, didn't know half the words they were using, and I just read and hung around and read and hung around and ended up getting interested in something I didn't think I would ever get interested in. So I appreciate everybody that was here. Everybody hit the thumbs up button. Everybody that subscribed. If you haven't, make sure you subscribe. Thursday night, I'm going to have T-Jump on, Tom Jump. If you're not familiar, he's a fantastic debater, rhetorician. He's got all of it. He's a cool guy, and I think we're going to have fun. It's not going to be any debating or anything like that. But we're going to find a lot more out about T-Jump than we've known before. I can guarantee you that. So I appreciate you hanging out. Thank you so much. I'm so humbled. Have a good evening. And if you're a Christian, pray for Clinton, that he gets a steady job with income coming in, because that's a serious issue, especially with a huge move like that. I mean, that's just, we got to get the man paid. If you're in Las Cruces, anywhere around there, hook him up. Good night. Thank you. Peace out. See you later next time.